Peace be to you. Ain't no problem of evil. Let us begin with a question.
Hi everyone, welcome to Curiously Catholic, the Evangelion podcast, sharing the mission to light the fire of Christ in the hearts of Catholics by sharing the truth of our faith in a compelling manner. In this podcast, we're going to be picking the brains of Catholic enthusiasts to try and get to the bottom of how to live truly as a Catholic in contemporary times. My name is Dominic Malageri, and in this episode, we're going to be talking to Father Mark Mary. How's it going, Father?
Hey, Dominic, good to be with you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. We spoke to you, was it a year ago now?
Yeah, just about a year ago.
Yeah. That was one of the first episodes I ever did with the whole live and everything. So it was quite a learning curve for me.
I think we were both new to it at that time. Since then, I've had a little more practice as well. So hopefully this one comes together nicely.
Cool. Yeah, hopefully we'll both do better. So just to reintroduce yourself, you are a CFR. How long have you been a CFR, and what do those letters stand for?
Yeah, so the name of my religious order is the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, which started in 1987 in the South Bronx, New York. And our initials are CFR, like Community of Franciscans of the Renewal. And so kind of in popular Catholic spaces, we're either, a lot of people just call us the CFRs because Franciscan Friars of the Renewal doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Personally, so I joined the order as a postulant in 2009, made final vows in 2014, and then I was ordained in May of 2018. So at this point, been around a little more than a decade.
That's pretty cool. And how have you found it? Like because everyone's got, I think Franciscans are probably one of the most well-known religious orders. Like I think people that aren't even Catholic can recognize a Franciscan, or those who have like maybe dabbled a bit, like, oh, I've heard of Franciscans. So from your perception of being outside of the Franciscans to being a Franciscan now for 10 years, how has your perception of everything changed?
You know, that's a great question. The reality, so I grew up in Southern California, Orange County, California. And what's interesting about California is that it's like a very actually Franciscan area. Like, the missionaries came there. And if you look up and down the coast of California, all of the names have these names of saints or of Catholic things. So it's like San Diego, San Juan Capistrano, Los Angeles, right? It's actually Nuestra Señora de los Ángeles, like Our Lady of the Angels, San Jose, Sacramento, as in like Blessed Sacrament. So it's very Franciscan territory. But I went to a parish named San Antonio, but I actually never connected the dots. So I didn't know anything really about Franciscans at all. Mm-hmm. And it was just kind of by chance that I heard that Franciscans take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But what I didn't realize is that all of these other orders do that as well. So actually, I had almost no expectations of what a Franciscan was before I entered. So the whole process of becoming a friar was actually my first knowledge of the friars. I think a lot of people maybe there was the movie Nacho Libre that's about like a Jack Black about a Franciscan. Maybe that formed their understanding of Franciscans, and if that was the case for me, it would have changed a lot. But it was all kind of, I came in just kind of like, like I've kind of said, just without expectations.
Yeah, it's interesting because a friend of mine who actually interviewed last year on the podcast, she's joined a religious order, the Servadoras, and she grew up in Steubenville. And like, I guess from our perspective over here in New Zealand, Steubenville is kind of like the holy land of Catholicism, because like you've got all the big names like Matt Fradd, Jacob Imam, and Scott Hahn, and like the Franciscan University. And she said a similar thing, like she was surrounded by it so much she just didn't see it anymore. And so she came over to New Zealand for an OE, and that's when she kind of got her eyes opened and later on that journey. But yeah, it's interesting how that can happen. Like, I think it was like, because you think like Los Angeles, like, okay, that's just a place, and it's like, oh no, but it's got a really Catholic name, and yeah. Even like I went to university in Wales, and there's lots of places with the prefix. The place is called Llanfair, which is the Chapel of Mary, because Wales used to be a very Catholic place. So that's pretty interesting. It's like how Catholicism is all around us, and we don't even notice, eh?
Yeah, and that's and that's like it is what it is. It's certainly, if we take advantage of it, it could be great opportunities for conversations for handing on the faith, especially if we're parents to our children. These are great, great opportunities, great teaching moments.
Yeah, we just need to. Yeah, that's a really good point. Because if you were told all the Catholicism like in each of those places, then having that information would have been really like a tools in your arsenal, eh?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, there's like a thing in I think in public school, even like we went to the mission San Juan Capistrano, which is one of the kind of the more well-known ones. But even when we did that, it was like as a historical place. There was no like deeper conversation about its significance or about the Franciscans or about the faith, things like that. So certainly as Catholic catechists or evangelists or youth ministers or parents, if we find a couple of these little, places in our world to make a little visit, make it incarnational, have an experience and teach a lesson, I think can really make it, come home for kids or for those who we're trying to kind of walk with.
That's really cool. Yeah. So you're Franciscan. One thing that always confused me about Franciscans is there's so many different types of Franciscan. So you've got, I don't know how many types, but there's definitely the OFMs, the Capuchins, the CFRs. I don't know if there's any others. I suppose you've got the Poor Clares, which are kind of like a Franciscan for women. But why are there so many? Is it you guys just don't get on, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I suppose there's probably a lot of different answers to it. So the big three would be the Capuchins, the OFMs, and then the conventuals. And so kind of the OFMs, I think, are kind of probably historically the biggest. The Capuchins would be like Padre Pio was a Capuchin. St. Maximilian Kolbe would have been a conventional. And then, like you mentioned, the Poor Clares. and there's a number of other ones. I think part of it is the Franciscan kind of charism or spirituality, however you want to frame it. It's kind of about maybe how you do something as opposed to what you do. And so one implication of that is that you can have a Franciscan community that has many different applications or types of work. So that would be kind of like the more maybe generous answer. I think part of it as well is that the Franciscan ideal is pretty high, and we're all just sort of fallen people. And once you grow in laxity, maybe in one area, it's really hard to sort of tighten that area of your life up. And so I think a lot of like Franciscans, we can start with a high ideal of poverty or simplicity or prayer or whatever it is. But as time goes on, we kind of have make one little excuse, one little like compromise here or there. And eventually sometimes it's just like, okay, we just need to kind of have a break, begin again, and kind of the pattern continues. So and that doesn't actually have to happen by a whole new community getting started. I think there's ways you could do that within a community, but it's probably a combination of a couple of those things.
That's really cool. And because I was originally like, my initial perception of this was like kind of like, oh, division, they're not getting on. But then like as I was doing a theology of the body course with Christopher West, and he talks about how like our diversity kind of is our unity. And in that, it kind of made a lot more sense that like, Franciscan isn't just one thing, like you say, it's like it's a way of life, not necessarily like just a rule, but like it has so many different expressions for the same thing, and therefore you can reach a lot of different people. And I thought it was quite interesting, and it made me like kind of view it differently as more of a more unitive thing than a divisive thing. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Sure, right, and there's a Franciscan application to the cloister life, and there's a way in which you can be Franciscan and work in universities, and there's a way you can be Franciscan and be pastors, and there's a way you can be Franciscan and whatever, and work at a homeless shelter. So there are like a lot of different applications of it, which I think is part of why there is such a diversity.
I was just thinking of another famous Franciscan would be Friar Tuck. That probably be how people got perception of Franciscans is that for me it would have been in the cartoon version.
It's me too. Actually, I don't know if we're gonna end up doing it, but I was working on brainstorming this little like kind of fun video of looking at Franciscans in kind of like Hollywood movies, and there are a couple of little examples. Usually it's like a rotund, jolly, somewhat kind of like what's the hard-headed, not hard-headed, like kind of a little bit ditzy or something like that kind of guy. That's a bit of the caricature.
Yeah. They're kind of like the hippies of the Catholic world, Franciscans, because especially when you look at like some of St. Francis's writings, they're very flowery and prancing about in nature and such like.
Well, some of the stories about him are certainly like that. Some of his writings are pretty intense, but definitely the lived reality of the Franciscans, at least that I lived with, are very different than the Friar Tucks and the Nacho Libres of Hollywood.
I'll look forward to watching that video. So as you mentioned earlier, the poverty, chastity, and obedience are like part of all religious orders. I think even to a point, diocesan priests live that out. But like Franciscans are more known for the poverty aspect, and that's kind of what I want to get into in this episode, is kind of talking about poverty as a reality for us to live, like even as lay people. It's like is it even possible in today's world? So what are your initial thoughts on that question?
Yeah, and I think actually looking at the vows in general is a great starting point, because there can be a maybe like a temptation or a limitation in our vision of it, where we see that which the person is doing and we don't see God's part. So you see poverty, and you see chastity, and you see obedience, and it can like, if that's where the conversation stops, it can look like, oh, look at these things that these people are doing for the Lord. But like I kind of like to look at it this way. Like when I professed my final vows, I said like, okay, I will be poor, and Lord, I will be dependent on you, and and what he replies, like there's the Lord's response, and like, and I will provide for you, and I will care for you and your needs. And I say like, I will be chaste, Lord. I'm not going to look to fulfill this desire for love in creation or in creatures. And the Lord says, yeah, and I will love you with the love that satisfies. And when I say like, I will be obedient, I'm like, Lord, I will go where you lead me, and I will, follow your will. And the Lord says that like, and I will be a good shepherd to you, and I will lead you to still waters and green pastures. And so there is this part in which what these vows ultimately are creating a space where the Lord can be the Lord in our lives. Right. And so, and that was so essential for St. Francis and for Franciscans and for St. Clare. And like early on, they really, really, really actually had to fight to protect the ideal of the poverty they wanted to live. And the reason they were doing that is they saw this as like this privileged place. Like dependence and poverty is this the privileged place where we can be radically dependent on the Lord, and we can like encounter and experience in the stuff of our real lives his providence and his fatherhood and his care. And so part of it certainly is about kind of following the poverty of Jesus, but it's at the service of also entering into Jesus' own relationship with the Father. That like by not grasping and not accumulating and not and being dependent on the Lord, this creates like real situations and experiences of his care for us.
Well, that really opens it up, because I suppose, like, on the face of it, it just seems like a really cool principle that's not actually attainable. But when you look at it like that, I suppose you could, and you can see now why there are so many different like expressions of this in the Franciscan life. Because when you're talking about poverty, there is that extreme version of it's like, okay, I'm going to give up my whole paycheck and my house and any of my belongings, but then there's also like, okay, I'm a father, I've got 3 kids, how do I live poverty in that situation? And it's about that openness to God and allowing space for him, which we see, like, I don't know if you've heard of the Exodus 90 program, but I've been leading a fraternity this year in that, and it kind of has that similar aspect of like, how many things can you get rid of in your life, and how does that open up space for God? What you said just really opened up the concept of like poverty, of being, because like on the face of it, you kind of look at it and say, okay, poverty, get rid of all my possessions, get rid of all my money, and just live this radical life. And whereas that seems cool, it also seems very unattainable, especially for us lay people in the world today. Like, I'm a father, I've got a job, I need to maintain a house, get a car and stuff. But instead of saying, okay, let's get rid of all that and live poverty, it's a case of, what can we get rid of in order to make more space for God? And would you say that's a truer expression of what poverty means?
It's good. Like it's the I think a good word that's applicable like across different states of life is like a healthy dependence on God, or kind of using the language of Scripture, kind of like, unless you become like a child, there is this way in which it allows us to still be children before the Lord. For the laity as well, right? It can feel like a little challenge, because like as a dad, you have these responsibilities and you have to take care of your children, and you need to have like some money and savings, etc. And so there is a part still in which we discern and we make actions, and we're willing to take some risks if we really think the Lord's inviting us into that, always prudently. But a great example would be just maybe adjusting the theme a little bit of just simplicity, right? Because one of the simplicity of our life is at the service ultimately of intimacy with the Lord. By not having to accumulate and not having to take care of all of these things, we have the resources of time and just energy, which we can ultimately use for relationship. Mm-hmm. And so our poverty actually is part of what allows us to have, 4 or 5 hours of prayer a day. And again, that's not what it's going to look like for the laity, but if you are spending all your time accumulating, taking care of and playing with your toys or whatnot, or screens and all of that sort of stuff, well, okay, that's going to like significantly cut into your space for being with your family or for being with the Lord.
No, it's really cool and really interesting, because like we've run this Exodus 90 program this year. I don't know if you've heard of it, and one of the things that like comes out of that is like you realize how much time you have if you're not scrolling through your phone, but also all these other little things, like you've got to decrease your time in the shower. Like short, cold showers is one of the things that we have to do. And it's like, if I'm spending like 5 minutes in the shower opposed to 20 minutes, like soaking, letting hot water run over me and stuff, and just contemplating life, I actually have more time to spend doing other things, prayer, time with my family, reading a good book. And then it's like, you realize how much time you have freed up, even with like on the fast days, eating. It's like, I don't have any meal prep time. I don't have any eating time. I've just got time. And those are one of those things that really helps you check that out, or like reflect on your own practices a bit. Is it similar in your community? Like, is it quite austere, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly It's what's the word for it? We have I think we actually, for our men in Pashansi, which is our initial formation, we take them on this 3 week like backcountry kind of like man camp backpacking trip. And part of it is there's a number. It's kind of the spirituality of the desert, and it's just a good thing for men to do hard things together. But we have these guides, and they talk about the comfort zone, challenge zone, and like panic or crisis zone. And that we don't want to be in the comfort zone. The comfort zone, there's not going to be growth in comfort zone. The panic and crisis zone, like we don't want to get there either, but we want to live in this challenge zone. And so for us, I think we kind of live in that challenge zone where, like our seats aren't lazy boys, but but they still they're like wood chairs with backs to them. Or, like our friaries aren't like freezing cold, but like they're not, warm and toasty or so it's like there is this, it's not particularly like there's nothing really soft or pretty or that smells good or whatever, but also like it's not like we're in pain all the time. So it's kind of a bit of a middle ground there.
Yeah, I suppose well, did you find like initially it felt like pain because it wasn't completely comfortable and maybe your life beforehand had more of those comforts? So your initial, as you entered the community, were you kind of like, wow, this is difficult?
It's what the difficulty is made light by like the romance of it and the fact that you feel kind of cool and special and like you're doing this, like it has like a bit of a feeling of adventure. At least it did for me, especially the externals and over time that kind of like, if you will, the romanticism of it or the novelty of it starts to fade. And that's when it's things like when you have to go and drive and pick up a brother at the airport and you don't have a cell phone and he doesn't have a cell phone. And it turns out he got picked up by somebody else and you drive around the airport for 2.5 hours and get back at like midnight. Those are the times when like, okay, this is when the poverty like feels the pinch. It's not so much just in like maybe the daily living of things.
Oh wow, that's insane. Yeah, because I remember my friend once gave up his phone completely for Lent, and then we all like did a group outing, and he was like, "Yeah, I had no idea how I was going to find you guys because it was at this big event and there was like thousands of people, and so but it was amazing because like we just found him. He was just walking around, and then we're like, oh, there he is. And then it's like, it was like, oh, I forgot you were coming along because obviously he didn't text and confirm or anything because he couldn't. And so it was like almost mysterious, just seeing him come out of a crowd and like, what are you doing here? It was quite miraculous. But yeah, I mean, the idea of just not having a phone, just like, I don't know if it's anxiety, but it fills me with discomfort. The idea of saying, okay, I'm going to pick you up at the airport. Good luck. But I guess there was that, but that was a way of life at some point, before smartphones.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of like fun. I usually laugh because when I'm traveling in for an event or a retreat and a talk, and I tell somebody I don't have a cell phone, you can see kind of like their initial response of like panic, of like, oh, like, okay, if you like, how do you do this? Because right, they only know like texting or calling the person who gets there. I'm like, it's gonna be all right. I'll just I'm like, this is my flight information. I'll come out of the gate and I'll stand out there and you'll drive around and you'll see me and we'll be okay with it. It's like, okay, I'm going to walk you through this. We're going to be all right.
It's like, I'll be the one dressed like a Franciscan.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you'll, I'm easy to spot.
Yeah, I guess I remember one year I just took the internet off my phone and then I had to drive somewhere and I didn't know how to get there. And I was like, how do I get there? Like, I didn't have a map or anything. So I had to call up my friend and he had to use like Google Maps on his computer and he told me, and then I just had to remember it. I was like, what is this memory? Mm-hmm. But I want to get into the main part of the topic, which is kind of talking about God's providence, because that will fit a lot into this idea of poverty, of like, again, we kind of see it in this conversation we were just having about not having a cell phone and meeting up, because I think my perception when I hear of God's providence initially, I think, oh, God's going to give me something. So it could be food, it could be like items that I need. But I suppose God's providence is actually broader than that, in that He provides the people that you need, and He provides the opportunities that you need in order to get to where you need to go. Could you tell us a bit about God's providence? Like, do you have like a working definition or anything?
I don't know that I have a working definition, but I probably have there's two components of it which come to mind at the moment. So number one would be like the things that the Lord like causes to happen, like the things that He like directly orchestrates and initiates. The second would be His capacity to respond and to work with what does happen through free will and through the effects of the fallen world. And that in both of these, right there, we come to Romans 8:28. For God is at work in the good. For God is at work for the good in all things for those who love Him. And so as the Lord reveals His will and leads us down a certain path, it's for the good of those who love Him. But also, whatever happens, even our own sin, He's going to respond to that. And in His providence, He can make it ordered and work for the good as well. And I think I want to make that distinction because we can get in trouble sometimes, or I see it, some folks get in trouble when something happens in life and we immediately presume like it's God's will and it's God's providence. And there is a part where it's like, okay, did He actually cause this to happen, or did it just happen and He's going to respond to it? Because I think if we over assume like, oh, this is definitely what God brought this boy into my life or this girl into my life or whatever. It's like, well, hold on. Like, let's just, if that doesn't work out, it can be like, well, God, why did you bring this boy into my life if you didn't mean for us to get married? It's like the false expectations can lead to disappointment.
Yeah, because I suppose then you get into like God's will, and there's 2 points to that. There's the active and the permissive will of God, and like one's like God working into your life, like the finger of God, and the other is like God. Well, I imagine it's kind of like God's like, yeah, I suppose I can have you. It's like, oh yeah, go for it. Yeah, date that guy, see who cares.
Yeah.
But like, I guess when you think of like this, relying on God's providence, I think it comes into discernment a bit as well. Like, there's this attitude that some people have of like, okay, I'm gonna, quit my job and I'm just gonna discern, or I'm gonna get rid of all my stuff and let God provide for me. And I suppose what comes up in my heart when I start thinking about that is like, how is that not putting God to the test? My friend told a story about how. I suppose it's an airport story again. Is like, I'm gonna fly to this place. I'm not gonna make any plans about how I'm gonna get where I need to go, and God will just provide. And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, but that's because you're making Him. How much do we need to be involved in planning our future or what have you?
Yeah. I think actually it's in a particular context, but I think there's a principle established there which is helpful. Because I think it was Evangelii Gaudium, which is an apostolic exhortation from Pope Francis. He kind of has a whole part in there which is for preachers, and he kind of comes after guys, priests who are like, no, I'm not gonna prepare for this. I'm just gonna trust that the Spirit's gonna take care of this. And it's like, well, that's just not good stewardship and good responsibility. And it's kind of presumptive on God's grace. And it's probably just, it's either kind of a funny spirituality or just a laziness. Right. And so, we're going to work together with the Lord, and we always want to be led by Him. And so there is this kind of incarnational principle of we absolutely have faith and a radical confidence in His ability to bring good about in all things, but also this understanding that we've also been giving like reason and prudence, right, is like the queen of the virtues. And there is good discernment and healthy decision making, which is also part of how the Lord wants to work in our lives. And so really stepping outside of taking like a radical risk or a radical step back, I would generally really say you're going to want to discern it and almost have like an obedience to it. Like, nobody, you don't give everything away and become a Franciscan without actually discerning with the friars and the vocation director. And then at some point they're like, no, actually this seems like an authentic call of God. Like you can give your stuff away and come move out to New York. I think it would be generally imprudent to make that type of discernment just on your own.
Okay. So like when it comes to doing these more radical things, it is best to bring it to a spiritual director and like talk it through rather than just say on a wing and a prayer, just go into life.
Yeah, a spiritual director or, a confessor. If you're married, you know what I mean? Like you definitely need to run this by your husband or your wife. Like but we need to, we're just, sometimes we can have some blind spots in ourselves and some difficulties discerning like what's really me and my kind of personality or quirkiness or tendency and what's the Lord. And so it's very helpful to have an outside person to help us navigate the stuff, especially again, when we're talking about something like really leaning towards the extreme.
Yeah. So like in a day-to-day life, it's would you say it's not likely that we'll be asked or it's wise to do live a rather extreme reliance on God's providence. It's more like the just smaller things. So like, rather than saying I'm going to catch a plane to this place and God will provide my way from the airport to my friend's house, it's more like I'm just gonna go and do my best today and God will, do my best and let God do the rest kind of attitude.
I want to be careful because, and this is why I do think there's space for good discernment and you still want somebody in it. But there are people who the Lord works in unique ways with. And I don't want to say like that's absolutely not authentic or the will of God. But because we have examples of it in the saints, and I see examples of people who just, the Lord just works a little bit differently with them, but it's authentic. But at the same, like you don't want to get hurt or hurt somebody else. And so again, some of the bigger things, especially if at some place it seems like it might be jeopardizing, like or contrary to one of your duties or responsibilities. Like if you're doing something that's like really taking you away from that, I would just want to discern it and at least bounce it off one or two other trusted people.
Yeah, so I suppose we need to take into consideration it's not just me and God. It's the situation God's put me in, which involves people. Like if you're married, I said like within a family, but even if you're single, it's like within the people that you're interacting with. So if it's going, like I remember a good priest that I know told me when discerning what you're going to do for Lent, ensure that your mortification does not become somebody else's mortification. And so like, and that's a good thing to use as a measure of what we are to do for Lent. But I guess also like how much we're supposed to lean on God's providence is like, is this hindering someone else's way of life, or is this just for my own gratification? Look what God did in my life, kind of situation. This is a cool story. Which brings me to the question of like, okay, so how are we supposed to be? What posture are we supposed to have towards God in these situations? Is it just like, because I guess surrender is part of it, like giving up the things that are like major comforts to us. But are we just supposed to be passive to God's will, or how much action are we supposed to apply?
Yeah, Dominic, do you have, it might be helpful, at least at the beginning of the conversation, like, do you have maybe a specific area or type of question or discernment that we could maybe look at?
Well, I guess I'm just like, because again, the theme of the podcast is how to live in the world as in contemporary times as a Catholic, and I suppose living in God's providence is part of that. So, like having God as big as a part of your life. With the Franciscans, we see an extreme version of like this poverty and therefore reliance on God and reliance on God's providence. So, like, is that something that we can bring into our lay life, or is that something that, or do we, how deep do we go into this, and like, how do we respond to that, and like, how do we allow God to work in our life that way?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of like, what would be good examples applicable in a number of ways. I think, like I've seen this with families discerning adoption, where, right, it is to a, I have a family that I'm friends with. They have 4 biological children, and they were doing some mission work in Haiti, and then they met like a brother and sister who were very young and basically abandoned, and they discerned to begin the process of of adopting these children. And part of that is this is this reliance on providence that the Lord's going to provide. Like they're going to be stretched financially. Okay, the Lord's going to like provide for them financially to do this, and the Lord's going to provide them with the energy later in life and the capacity and maybe the guidance to parent these young boy and girl in what will be a difficult situation and all that's going to come with it. And so there is this part of like, okay, we're going to trust the Lord's going to provide both the materials but also the resources and the strength to do this. And so there is I think it's probably a good example, because there is this I don't know what we could call it. There is kind of like an active listening or observing of the world, where it's not just, you're not just clicking channels and letting things go, but like you're actually looking at situations and relating them to the Lord and asking like, okay, Lord, is there something you want me to do in this situation? And so that could be on a mission trip, or that could be when you're at the grocery store or whatnot. It's like, okay, like, are you inviting me, Lord, to encounter and to speak to this person? Are you inviting me to do maybe a little act of generosity for this person? There's just this kind of like, it's an intentional living. It's an active living where we're entering into this conversation and this dialogue with the Lord with this freedom that we're like, okay, Lord, if I feel like you're asking me to do something, I'm going to do it. But I think that might be a good, some initial thoughts. What are you thinking, Dominic?
No, I think it's really good. I like the example because it kind of brings it home, because I think like an experience of providence in my life, and I've probably shared this on the podcast before, is in beginning of 2019, my life completely changed. I was a chaplain for 7 years up until that point, and then I got itchy feet, decided to leave and start a degree. And that was a big leap. So it's like changing jobs, changing careers to become a nurse. So I just decided that I'm going to stop my income and I'm going to go and start paying a university to teach me. So that's a big financial thing. And then at the same time, we found a house we could afford to buy, and we had our first child. And so it was like, I guess that's like, okay, I don't worry about it. I'll just lean on God's providence. It's kind of an arrogant attitude to have towards that, but it's also a reality of that situation. And so, like, you gave that example of, the adoption, and it made me think about, okay, leaning on God's providence in a different situation. It's not about something I'm getting. It's about like, discerning what is God providing and what is God asking me to do in this situation. It is an active it is an active response from us, in that it's yes, we are receiving, but it's deciding, am I receiving this or am I trying to take something? Like, am I saying, God, I could really use the lift right now, can you provide a car? Or is it saying, I'm going to walk as far as God intends me to? And the Bible story of Elijah comes to mind, where he's just run away from the gods of Baal and he's hiding under a tree and he just sleeps and eats and sleeps and eats, and then God says, right, go. And I always relate that to the bread that the angel provides is the Eucharist. So go to Mass and pray and then sit in silence. That's the sleep. Or go on with your normal day and then go back to Mass. And it's about living that thing, because then you're in that mode where you're ready to receive, because you are receiving regularly from the Eucharist, from the Mass. And then once you're in that like mode of receiving, God will then be able to say, okay, now I want you to leave your job, or now I want you to help this person in the shop. So like, I suppose, would you agree that like what you're saying, that God's providence it's not about what you get, it's about how you live?
Yeah, I think so. I think so for sure. And it's just this disposition of trust ultimately in Him, in all things, right? And that's actually, I think with the Eucharist is a great place to go back to, because again, it's like ultimately we don't place our trust in a series of circumstances or ideas or plans, but we place our trust in Him. And that if He's with us on the journey, then that's ultimately what we need. Like if the Lord is with us and we're in His will, and we have certainty that He will provide and He will care for us. And I think just, and that like, any openness to life in general in marriage it's a providential thing, or oftentimes actually obedience to the church's teachings on different areas of life are going to be, ways in which we place ourselves in confidence when we, don't, when we have good ethics and morality in business, there's providence. I do think that more and more people have to, like, if they don't want to compromise their morals, like maybe they're not going to take certain jobs in certain areas. And it's like, okay, Lord, I can do this and kind of make this type of product, and it's going to make me a lot of money, but it's not moral. And so I'm going to not do that, trusting, that you will receive my obedience and my sacrifice and my faithfulness and provide what me and the family needs in a different way.
Yeah, well, that's a really powerful word right there. Like, because like, I suppose there's this idea of like more money is always a good thing, because if I have more money, I can do more good. But there is a line that we can't cross of like, how are you getting this money? And it's like, well, because there's the argument of like, well, if I'm not making this money, someone else is going to make this money, and at least if I make this money, I know it's going to go to somewhere good. But it's like, nah, that's a submission to God. And I was also thinking about just like, I suppose going into this conversation, when I was thinking of God's providence, I did have that attitude of like, what am I going to get out of this? Because I heard the story about, I heard like one of your brothers, Father Angelus Montgomery, was talking about how you as Franciscans, you don't do like a food shop. You're reliant on donations from other people to fill up your fridge. So like you can't meal prep. You can't like meal plan for the week. You have to you open the fridge and say, what is here that we can cook? And so that gave me this idea of like, okay, so God's providence is receiving food, and it's a thing. But then I was thinking, like, now at this point in the conversation, like, God provided the church, He provided the Mass, He provided a way to worship Him, and He provided teachings and doctrines and dogmas for us to live by. And that requires us to say no to ourselves and say yes to God, so that He can work in our life. And I guess that's a much bigger ask than, do we have enough in for nachos today? That's a very different story. But like, through following the church, which the Lord has provided, as we see in scriptures and throughout history, that's how we get our nachos at the end of the day. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Maybe another good example, which I think that was really well said, is I lived in Honduras for a couple of years as a friar, and there's a young man who is one of our neighbors. He was part of like our youth group as a kind of a middle teen, 14, 15. Around the age of 18, he was shot by like it was like a random robbery type of thing, left him paralyzed. So he was shot, left him paralyzed, and from the waist down, he was like really poor, and so like tin roof, cinder block walls, all that sort of stuff. He ended up having like really bad ulcers, and he was like laid up for so long that his hips fused. So he was in his bed for about 2 years without being able to move because they couldn't bend his legs to put him into a wheelchair, even to go outside. And it was in this time that like the brothers, we were there, we had a brother who was a nurse at the time, would go and visit him almost every day to help change some of his sores. And some women from the church would come, and the priest would come, and we'd bring him like communion, and we'd talk with him. And eventually we have a hospital down there, and eventually the medical center there was able to have this surgery, which removed part of his leg so his foot can bend, so his hip could bend, so he can get into a wheelchair. But he had this, like, at this point in his life, it's been about 5 years, he has this like really incredible faith. And when I was talking to him at one point, and I was like, hey, like, his name's Noe. Like, Noe, it's just the way you talk about it. It's like, it's almost as if like this was a blessing. Like if you could, like, would you change it? And he said, brother, like when I had the use of my legs, I wasn't walking like with the Lord. And now, I can't run, I can't walk, but I'm walking with the Lord. And like if having my legs back meant I wasn't walking with the Lord, then it's better that I am as I am here. And it's, what the Lord's providence in that situation did include some resources, but ultimately through the church and through the sacraments and through the family, ultimately that is the church, what the Lord provided him with was the very life of God. What God provided him with was the grace and the hope needed for him to persevere in the deep sufferings of life. And so I think that's a good example of the whole, is like, there's a lot of suffering in life, and there's a lot of difficulty in life. And through the church and through the sacraments and through his word and through community, what ultimately and most importantly the Lord is providing to us every day is the access to his very life, the grace and the strength that we need to persevere and have hope, and in the midst of our own difficulties, right? And that's a lot more than nachos, right?
Yeah.
And that's for everyone.
Oh man, yeah, brilliant stuff. Thanks for saying that. Like, because like I think we often, like, you've got the spiritual and corporal acts of mercy, and sometimes the corporal acts of mercy seem so much better because I can do this, or I can see this happening, and it means that we forget about the spiritual side of things. Like, yes, we are to provide shelter for the poor and food and medicine for the sick and stuff, but we're also to evangelize them and bring them the gospel. Wow, that's really. I just want to keep talking about it, but we have limited time and we have listener questions, and so I do want to get onto a few of those so our listeners can reap the benefits of your wisdom as well. So we have a question here from Anonymous. Oh, they didn't put the name. The first question we have is, we are told to rely on God's providence and not be self-reliant, yet he wants us to do our part too. Where is the line between God's providence and being passive? I guess we kind of already talked about this a bit, but can you maybe give like a brief of what we said?
I think a first part of it is definitely going to be the distinction of faithfulness to God and his law and his will in the area of like morality. Because I do think that is one area that we often can actually be self-reliant in and self-medicating in dealing with problems of taking things into our own hands when things are difficult. And so I do think like a very clear area of where we're dependent on him and trust him is in the area of choosing faithfulness to him and his law when it seems like we can get ahead or whatever, go in a different route. So I think that's part of it. And then the second of it, that's the church, we have this idea of like of both and, where we're keeping in tension these two different principles. And one of them is our following of God's will, our use of our reason, our use of what is kind of given to us, and then providence on him. And it's not like, oh, just always do this or always do that. There is a little bit of a mix, but we do what we think the Lord has given us to do, trusting that he'll make it fruitful. And if he leads us to a different path, like we trust that he'll provide, for us down that path as well. So it's a tough question to answer in the general. It's much more helpful in the specific, but hopefully that's some initially helpful ideas.
Yeah. I think as I found with every interview I've done, I come up with a topic and I realize it's so much more deeper than I ever realized, and I'm going to need more than an hour for it, but we'll just have to muddle on as we can do, and hopefully we inspire people to go deeper in themselves. Yeah. We've got a message here from someone who's called themselves Foreshadowing. People are afraid of determinism, but what if things are co-determined in that our authentic choices are part of the world God chooses to result? Co-determined. I don't know what that means. Do you understand that?
Yeah, I think I have a sense. It's like, is the script already written and we're just kind of walking along, and maybe we think we have free will, or we think our decisions matter, but actually they don't, because where we're going to end up and how we're going to get there and all that is predetermined. Or the second one is kind of like the Lord already knows where it's all going to go, but he also knows how we're going to act. And so like, it's kind of like the whole movie's already been cut, but we're playing it out just because, or whatever. And what we want to avoid is any sense of like our decisions not actually mattering. And we 100% have free will, and the Lord's going to lead us and guide us. But like our decisions matter at the end of the day. And I think that is like, there's both merit and faithfulness to the Lord, and then there's punishment for sin, because our decisions really matter. And that's probably, it's a pretty big topic but for the scope of this, I think that's one kind of point to just hammer home.
I guess there's a lot of questions about like, how do we balance our will with God's will, and how do we like not grasp at God's providence and like try and take it for our own. And I suppose for me, like the answer to those questions is about prayer, because it's about being close to God so that we can get to hear his voice. So can you like maybe elaborate a bit more about how does prayer play a role in this? What kind of prayer can we be doing as working class lay people in order to fully engage with God's will and God's providence? Yeah,
I think I think the scriptures often get overlooked in their importance. That the Lord has spoken to us and given us his word in the scriptures, and that so many of the answers that we need for the decisions we want to make are to be found there. But we can go about looking for God's will kind of in like an abstract prayer, like, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do here? And he's like, well, I kind of gave you the answers here, and I just need you. It's like, like, hey, I need, not this isn't it, but like, hey, I need you to read the directions. I just read the directions, and then you don't have to ask me, like, how do I do this? Like, just, I gave you the directions, read the directions. So that's, I think, praying with the scriptures, like, and really assimilating them and letting them sink in is going to radically provide for our capacity to hear the Lord's voice and to recognize it and to respond to it. If we're trying to discern the Lord's will apart from a real relationship with scriptures, he can still come to us and to guide us, but that's just not really how it's meant to be.
Yeah, I guess the fear that comes with that is kind of, what if I read something into scriptures that isn't there? How do I know what I am getting out of scriptures is God, and how do I know it's how do I know if it's me? Which kind of again leads into this whole thing of providence. Is like what if I'm trying to force providence?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think the Catholic response is that we read scriptures with the church, and some of them do have they actually have a literal sense. They actually mean something that's not up in the air, and so part of reading scripture also is a healthy study of it, which you might say, well, that seems like a lot of work, but we're talking about we're talking about the Word of God in Catholicism, right? It's worthy of our time and effort. So I think that maybe to add a little bit more to the initial answer, which can help with this one as well, is we're not meant to discern on an island or in a vacuum. And so absolutely, we want to know, we want to have we want to pray, but we also want to have conversations. We want to do research. And then ultimately, we have the Word of God, we have our prayer and our effort, and then we kind of make our decisions and say Lord, hey, I did the best I could here. This is what I think you want me to do. I'm going to entrust this decision to you. And then you kind of make the next best steps from there. I do have, because I realize our time's very short, I do have a couple of videos on Ascension Presents, which speak into discernment and some of the principles, which could be a good kind of follow-up place for your listeners who are hoping for some more.
Yeah, that sounds like a great place to start, because I think it's we are active in our life, and I suppose the decisions we make lead to the ability God has to have access to our lives. So things I was thinking of is doing your private prayers regularly, getting a spiritual director, and following the church by attending mass faithfully. Because I know that some people, especially nowadays, it's quite difficult to be obedient to the church, to be to have an authority over us that tells us almost how to live, is quite a struggle. So I guess the first point is looking into that and saying, okay, what is this? Is this me trying to take control of my life, or am I not following the church because I don't want it, or because it's actually wrong? And looking into that, and that's where a spiritual director would come in quite handy, I think.
Peace be to you.
But as you said, we are short on time now. But yeah, so if people want to find out more about the CFRs or more about yourself and the work that you do, where can we find that information?
So for those who want to kind of learn a little bit more, I think one of my favorite things we have going on is we have a podcast called the Poco Podcast. Myself and a number of brothers are on it, and that seems to be really fruitful. And then kind of our hub for things where we can direct people is just our Instagram. So it's CFR_Franciscans, which would be another good place to visit.
Very good. Right. Well, thank you for your time, Father, and everybody listening. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to what we have had a great discussion here on the Curiously Catholic podcast. And remember, if you want to get involved with what we're doing, check us out at evangelion.co.nz. Follow us on all social media apps, Instagram, Facebook. Just look up Evangelion NZ. Look up on our YouTube channel, All Curiously Catholic. So check out that, get involved, and help us create more content. So stay curious, stay Catholic, and God bless.
Let us begin with a question.